What if the battle you lose every single day, the one against that repeating sin, that persistent weakness, isn't entirely your fault? What if you're fighting the aftershocks of a forbidden apocalypse the Bible barely even whispers about? The official file begins simply enough. A garden, a serpent, a single act of disobedience. We're told this is the origin of our struggle, but at any crime scene, the first report is rarely the whole story. There are always anomalies in the record, haunting verses that speak of sons of God, giants, and a world so corrupt it required a global flood. Then, silence. It's a page torn from the most critical part of the case file. That missing page exists. Its name is the Book of Enoch. This isn't just another ancient story. It is the suppressed eyewitness testimony of that first cataclysmic event. It contains the operational details of a war that began not with mankind, but against mankind. An invasion from the heavens that poisoned the very source code of humanity. This censored record doesn't just describe an ancient apocalypse. It exposes the very blueprint of the enemy you face in the mirror every morning. Stick with this investigation, and you will understand the real reason for the war within. The official record of our fall from grace is a story we all know. It is profound, powerful, and fundamental. It begins in perfection, a pristine world called Eden, a garden sanctuary where God walked with man. There were only two inhabitants, Adam and Eve, formed in the very image of their Creator, living in a state of pure communion with Him. The terms of their existence were simple, defined by a single boundary, a single test of loyalty symbolized by a tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They were given dominion over all creation with this one sacred prohibition. We know how the first chapter of this tragedy unfolds. A third character enters the scene, a serpent, described as more cunning than any beast of the field. It doesn't use force, it uses information. It plants a seed of doubt, a subtle question that poisons the very foundation of trust. Did God really say? It reframes obedience as restriction and divine protection as divine jealousy. The serpent offers not a threat but a promise of enlightenment, of godhood. Your eyes will be opened, it hisses, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. It was the ultimate temptation, to trade innocence for intelligence, trust for autonomy. The allure was too great. The boundary was crossed, the fruit was eaten, and in that moment, the connection was severed. Innocence was lost, replaced by shame and fear. When God walked in the garden, they hid. Their first act as beings with knowledge was to conceal themselves from the source of all knowledge. The verdict was swift and heartbreaking: expulsion from paradise, a curse upon the serpent, pain in childbirth for the woman, and a life of toil for the man. From then on, the ground itself would resist him. Death, once a foreign concept, now became their inheritance. This is the foundational truth we are given, the entry point of sin into the world through one act of human choice. It is the beginning of the official case file on the fall of humanity. But every investigator knows the case doesn't end where the official report does. It begins there. If the garden incident was the complete file, the story should be straightforward. Yet, as we turn the pages of the official record, we find loose threads, unexplained details that feel like redacted lines in a classified document. They are clues left behind that point to a much larger, more complex crime scene. Consider the immediate aftermath. Cain, humanity's first murderer, is banished by God. He wanders east to the land of Nod. And then Genesis 4:17 reports something astonishing, almost casually. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, his wife? Where did she come from? Who were her people? The official record offers only silence, presenting us with an impossible equation. If Adam, Eve, and their sons were the only humans on earth, the existence of Cain's wife and the city he builds for his son implies a vast, unmentioned population existing just outside the frame of the story. It's the first torn page, a glaring hole in the narrative that we are simply expected to ignore. But the silence becomes deafening just a few pages later, in the prelude to the Great Flood. Genesis chapter 6 opens with 4 of the most cryptic and terrifying verses in the entire Bible. It speaks of a time when the sons of God saw the daughters of men, took them as wives, and produced offspring. The Nephilim, described as mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Who were these sons of God? The text doesn't explicitly say. And who were the Nephilim? The file mentions them, then abruptly moves on, as if the investigator was ordered to drop the subject. It is an unnerving piece of evidence, presented without context or explanation. It's like finding a weapon at a crime scene that belongs to neither the victim nor the primary suspect. It proves a third party was involved. It proves the story we were told is dangerously incomplete. This isn't just a plot hole, it's a deliberate redaction, and it is the entry point into the world of the Book of Enoch. To fill the deafening silence in the official record, we must turn to a witness who was present at the time, a testimony so explosive, so detailed, that the gatekeepers of history decided it was safer to lock it away. This witness is not a collection of theories or legends. It is a physical, historical document, the Book of Enoch. For centuries, this text was considered lost to the Western world, preserved only by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, who revered it as Holy Scripture. But in 1947, a discovery in the caves of Qumran changed everything. Amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest surviving manuscripts of the Bible, fragments of the Book of Enoch, were found. This was archaeological proof. This text was not a medieval forgery. It was ancient, widely read, and considered authoritative by Jewish communities during the Second Temple period, the very era in which Jesus and the apostles lived. Its influence is not a matter of speculation. It is written directly into the New Testament. The Epistle of Jude, in verses 14 and 15, contains a direct word-for-word quotation from the Book of Enoch, referring to him as Enoch, the seventh from Adam, and citing his prophecy about the Lord's final judgment. This isn't just a casual reference. It's the equivalent of a modern legal document citing a specific precedent. The early church fathers, figures like Tertullian and Irenaeus, also treated it with immense respect. So, what is this book? It is the detailed account of Enoch's life, his journeys into the heavens, and the divine revelations he received. It is not a replacement for Genesis. It is the director's cut. It contains the unabridged scenes that were left on the cutting room floor. It's the sworn testimony of a prophet who walked with God, saw the full extent of the celestial crime, and was tasked with recording the truth for a future generation, a generation that would need to understand the full scope of the cosmic war they were born into. It is time to hear his testimony. Enoch's testimony does not begin with a fall, but with a conspiracy. It wasn't an act of impulse, it was a premeditated crime. He identifies the perpetrators not merely as sons of God, but gives them their official designation, the Watchers, an order of angelic beings whose duty was to observe and guard humanity from above, never to interfere. But as they watched, their duty curdled into desire. Enoch records that in the days of Jared, his father, a faction of 200 watchers gathered, not in heaven, but on the summit of Mount Hermon, a peak that straddles the border of modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. The location is specific. This is not a myth. It is a crime scene. Their leader, an angel named Semjaza, voiced his hesitation. He feared he would be the only one to bear the punishment for this great sin. But his fear was not enough to stop the momentum of their rebellion. The others responded not with reason, but with a pact. "Let us all swear an oath," they declared, "and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." This was their Rubicon. Enoch's account stresses the formality of this moment. They swore a binding oath, a celestial contract sealed by curses upon themselves should they fail. It was an act of high treason against the kingdom of heaven. They named the mountain Hermon precisely because of this oath, a name derived from the Hebrew word herem, meaning curse. This was not a slip, a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, deliberate invasion. 200 celestial beings, beings of light and immense power, willingly forsook their heavenly habitation, their eternal station, and descended with a singular, corrupt purpose. The testimony is clear. The horror that was about to unfold upon the earth was not an accident. It was the result of a coordinated, mutinous operation. The first shots of the spiritual war had just been fired, not from hell below, but from the heavens above. The Watchers' invasion was not just biological, it was ideological. They came bearing gifts, but these were gifts poisoned with corrupting intent. The Book of Enoch provides a detailed intelligence brief on the specific technologies and secrets they revealed, and in doing so, it exposes the very blueprint of worldly corruption. The official record in Genesis is silent on how humanity became so wicked so quickly. Enoch's testimony provides the chilling answer. They had tutors from another world. He names the ringleaders and their specific courses. Azazel, one of the chief watchers, taught mankind the art of war, the crafting of swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Before this, violence was sporadic. Azazel gave humanity the tools for organized slaughter. He also taught the art of deception, the making of bracelets, the use of cosmetics to beautify the eyelids, and the knowledge of precious stones. This wasn't about aesthetics. It was about instilling vanity, materialism, and the power to present a false appearance. It was the birth of the mask. Other watchers taught different but equally corrupting sciences. Semjaza taught enchantments and root-cutting, giving humanity power over the natural world that was not meant for them, leading them to sorcery. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakijal taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, and so on. Let's be clear, this was not a benevolent act of enlightenment. It was a strategic release of classified information designed to accelerate humanity's fall. It replaced reliance on God with reliance on self, on weapons, on spells, on the stars. It was a systematic program to rewire human civilization, to build a new world order founded on principles antithetical to heaven. violence, vanity, and forbidden power. They didn't just break the rules, they taught humanity how to build a world where those rules no longer seemed to matter. This was the second phase of their invasion, the corruption of the human soul itself. The unholy union between the Watchers and human women produced an outcome that defied the very laws of creation. The official record in Genesis 6 gives them a name, Nephilim, a Hebrew word often translated as giants, but which also carries the connotation of the fallen ones. The text acknowledges their existence and their status as mighty men of renown, but then the file goes cold. It's a sanitized summary of an unspeakable horror. The Book of Enoch, however, does not flinch. It provides the uncensored field report. These were not merely tall men. They were a monstrous hybrid, an abomination of celestial and terrestrial flesh. Enoch describes their height as a staggering 300 cubits, an almost unimaginable scale that would make them living mountains. Their birth tore apart the natural order, and their existence would tear apart the world. These beings were born with a flaw in their very design, an insatiable, ravenous hunger. Their nature was a reflection of their parents' limitless desire. They consumed everything humanity could produce: the grain from the fields, the cattle from the herds, the wine from the presses. They were a walking plague of locusts, a biological black hole draining the life from the earth. When humanity could no longer sustain them, when every silo was empty and every flock devoured, the Nephilim's hunger turned. They turned against the animals, sinning against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. They became predators of all life, and then, in the ultimate act of corruption, they turned against their Creator's own kind. They began to devour human beings. This wasn't just violence, it was a perversion of the food chain, a complete inversion of the divine order. Enoch's testimony paints a terrifying picture, a world where humanity was no longer at the top of the food chain, but had become livestock for its own monstrous offspring. The mighty men of renown were not heroes. They were the first great predators of mankind, and their cannibalistic rampage was the horrifying physical manifestation of the spiritual corruption that now saturated the globe. The rampage of the Nephilim was just the epicenter of a cataclysm that shook the entire planet. The corruption that began as a spiritual conspiracy on a mountaintop had now manifested as a physical reality of blood and violence. The Book of Enoch describes a world spiraling into total anarchy, a planetary ecosystem pushed to the brink of collapse. The violence of the giants was contagious. Humanity, armed with the forbidden knowledge of Azazel and tutored in the ways of rebellion, followed the example of their corrupt celestial masters and their monstrous offspring. Lawlessness became the new law. Men turned against each other with the new, deadly weapons they had been taught to forge. Wickedness, as Enoch describes it, multiplied, spreading like a plague with no cure. Fornication, corruption, and betrayal became the common languages of mankind. The devastation was so complete, so absolute, that the very planet itself began to cry out. Enoch's testimony personifies the earth as a victim, a sentient being groaning under the weight of the atrocities committed upon her. It is a powerful, haunting image. And the earth made accusation against the lawless ones. Imagine a world where the screams of the innocent were so numerous they became the background noise of daily life. Imagine rivers choked not with silt but with the blood of the slain. Imagine a planet whose very soil was saturated with violence. This was not a world with pockets of evil. This was a world where evil had become the environment itself. The cries of the souls of men, slain unjustly, rose up to the gates of heaven. It wasn't just a few voices, but a chorus of agony, a desperate plea for justice from a world that had lost all semblance of it. The crime was no longer contained. The evidence of the Watcher's treason was now written in blood across the face of the entire globe. The silence from heaven could not last much longer. The breaking point had been reached. Here we arrive at the heart of the censored file. This is the single most critical piece of intelligence that the Book of Enoch declassifies, and it is the key that unlocks the true nature of the war you are fighting. It answers the question that the official record leaves hanging. What is the precise origin of demons? The modern conception often vaguely points to fallen angels. But Enoch's testimony is far more specific and far more terrifying. As the cries of the earth reached heaven, judgment was passed. The Nephilim, these hybrid abominations, were destined for destruction. They were set against each other in brutal warfare, and the earth was cleansed of their physical forms. But this is where the true horror begins. Their bodies could be killed, but what of their spirits? They were a unique entity, born of both immortal, heavenly spirit and mortal, earthly flesh. They belonged to neither realm. And so Enoch reveals the chilling verdict. And now the giants, who are produced from the spirits and flesh, shall be called evil spirits upon the earth, and on the earth shall be their dwelling. Let that sink in. Their spirits were not sent to a celestial prison like their Watcher fathers. They were not allowed into the afterlife of mortal men. They were condemned to remain on earth. These disembodied spirits, born from a monstrous union, are now cursed to wander the planet, forever tormented by an insatiable hunger and a burning hatred for the humanity they can no longer physically dominate. These are the beings we call demons. They are not just fallen angels. They are the vengeful, disembodied ghosts of their monstrous offspring. This is the real reason your struggle is so intense. You are not just fighting abstract temptations or your own internal weaknesses. You are contending with a race of invisible, parasitic entities whose entire existence is defined by their desire to afflict, oppress, destroy, and torment mankind. They are the lingering psychic residue of that first forbidden apocalypse. They are the army the Watchers left behind, and their primary battleground is the human soul. While the earth was drowning in lawlessness, heaven was not blind. The cries of the perishing did not fade into the void. They reached the highest echelons of celestial authority. Enoch's testimony shifts the camera from the earthly crime scene to the heavenly throne room, revealing the prosecution team that would bring the case before the Lord of Spirits. He identifies them by name: Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel. These are not just generic angels, they are the chief princes of heaven, each with a specific domain and authority. Enoch presents them as witnesses, their hearts breaking at the sight of the carnage. They see the rivers of blood, the unrestrained wickedness, and the suffering of both humanity and the earth itself. In a powerful scene, Enoch records their conversation. They turn to one another, their voices filled with anguish. The earth, made without inhabitant, cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. It is a declaration that the foundational state of creation, peace, has been violated. The suffering is so profound that even the archangels, beings of immense power and eternal perspective, are moved to despair. This is a critical detail. It shows that the suffering on earth was not part of some inscrutable, detached divine plan. It was an outrage, an aberration that grieved the very heart of heaven. The archangels do not simply observe, they become advocates. They gather the cries of the souls of the slain and agree to present their case, their plea for justice, directly before the Most High. Their action forms a crucial bridge in the narrative. It confirms that humanity was not abandoned. It shows that even when divine justice seems slow, powerful advocates are working behind the scenes. They are the celestial prosecutors, gathering the overwhelming evidence of the Watcher's crimes and preparing to demand a verdict from the ultimate judge. Their grief and their resolve are the prelude to the coming judgment, the turning point in this cosmic war. The pleas of the archangels did not go unheard. Enoch's account then takes us to the climactic moment of divine intervention. The Most High, the Holy and Great One, finally breaks his silence. His voice is not one of sorrow, but of absolute authority. The time for observation is over. The time for judgment has come. The verdict is delivered in a series of swift, decisive commands, each assigned to a specific archangel, like a general issuing orders to his commanders. And the first order reveals the depth of God's mercy amidst his wrath. He speaks to Uriel, the angel who presides over the world and its deepest terrors. "Go to the son of Lamech," he commands, "and say to him in my name, hide thyself, and reveal to him the end that is approaching." The son of Lamech, of course, is Noah. This is a pivotal moment that connects Enoch's secret history directly with the official record of Genesis. The Book of Enoch provides the behind-the-scenes context for the story of Noah's Ark. The Great Flood is now reframed. It is not merely a punishment for human sin, it is a global, divine, surgical procedure. It is an act of cleansing, a desperate measure to wash the earth clean of the genetic and spiritual contamination of the Nephilim and the unholy knowledge of the Watchers. God's first act of judgment is not destruction, but preservation. Before unleashing the cataclysm, he secures the future. He ensures that a righteous remnant, a pure seed of humanity, will survive to repopulate the world. The command to Noah is a beacon of hope in a story of utter darkness. It proves that God's ultimate goal was not to annihilate his creation, but to save it from a corruption so profound that it threatened to erase the very image of God from the earth. The ark was not just a boat, it was a genetic and spiritual time capsule built to carry the future of humanity through the cleansing fire of the flood waters. With the preservation of humanity secured through Noah, the Most High turns his attention to the architects of the apocalypse. The verdict is not a single blanket punishment. It is a series of precise, personal sentences tailored to the crimes of the chief conspirators. First, the Lord addresses Raphael, the angel of healing. In a moment of profound irony, the healer is commanded to carry out a sentence of imprisonment. "Bind Azazel hand and foot," the order thunders, "and cast him into the darkness." The location of his prison is specified, a desolate desert named Dudail. He is to be cast into a pit covered with jagged rocks and left in total blackness, never to see the light again. Enoch's testimony is explicit. This is not a temporary holding cell. He will remain there until the great day of judgment, when he will be cast into the eternal fire. The text adds a chilling detail. "And on him lay all sin." Azazel, the teacher of corruption, is made to bear the weight of the very evil he unleashed. Next, the verdict falls upon Semjaza, the leader who first organized the oath. The command is given to Michael, the warrior prince of heaven. He and his companions are to be bound, but only after they have been forced to witness the destruction of their own beloved children, the Nephilim. Their punishment is compounded by this psychological torment. They must watch the monstrous fruit of their sin annihilate itself before their own sentence begins. Then they are to be bound fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth. This is a crucial detail. Their prison is not some distant hell. It is within the earth itself. They are to be held as prisoners of war, buried deep within creation until the final judgment. The sentence is a demonstration of perfect, terrifying justice. The beings who abandoned heaven for the pleasures of earth are now condemned to be imprisoned within it, stripped of their power, bound in darkness, and forced to await a final, fiery reckoning. The first phase of heaven's counteroffensive is complete. The leaders of the rebellion have been neutralized. In the midst of these cosmic judgments and celestial battles, the Book of Enoch continually returns to the role of its human protagonist. Enoch is not a passive observer. He is an active participant, a divinely appointed intermediary in this cosmic legal proceeding. His official title, as given to him by heaven, is Scribe of Righteousness. It's a title that defines his unique and crucial function in this entire saga. After the verdicts are passed in heaven, it is Enoch who is tasked with delivering the sentence to the condemned. He becomes a prophet not to humanity, but to the fallen angels themselves. Imagine the sheer audacity of this mission. A mortal man, commanded to stand before 200 powerful, immortal beings and inform them that their rebellion has failed and their doom is sealed. The narrative describes the terror that grips the watchers when they hear the news from Enoch. Stripped of their pride, they are filled with trembling and fear. In a moment of desperate hope, they make a request. They beg Enoch, the mortal scribe, to write a petition for them, a plea for forgiveness that they hope he can read before the Lord of heaven. They themselves are so ashamed and condemned that they can no longer even lift their own faces towards the heavens to speak. Enoch, in his role as a righteous scribe, agrees. He records their pleas, their remorse, their desperate desire for mercy. He then goes to the waters of Dan, near Mount Hermon, the very place their conspiracy began, and reads their petition aloud until he falls into an exhausted sleep. This act demonstrates his faithfulness to his role. He records the truth of their plea, just as he recorded the truth of their sentence. But the answer comes to him in a vision, and it is absolute. Their petition is denied. There will be no peace, no forgiveness. It is Enoch who must return to the weeping, defeated watchers and deliver this final, crushing news. His role is cemented. He is the unwavering messenger of divine truth, the human scribe entrusted with recording the official, unalterable verdict of a heavenly court. To validate the authority of the judgments he carries, Enoch is granted access to the very source of that authority. His testimony now shifts from a legal proceeding to a profound mystical experience. He is taken on a guided tour of the heavenly realms, a journey designed to strip away any doubt about the power and majesty of the God he serves. This isn't a dream, it's a sensory overload, a direct perception of a reality beyond human comprehension. He describes being carried into the heavens, arriving at a house built of stones of crystal. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, all gleam with an impossible light. The structure itself is surrounded by a river of fire, and its gates burn with an eternal flame. As he enters, he is hit by a paradox of sensation. It is as hot as fire and as cold as ice. There is no joy here, only a profound, terrifying awe. Fear seizes him, and he falls prostrate, his mortal frame unable to withstand the raw holiness of the place. But this is only the antechamber. As he lies on the ground, he sees another house, greater still, built entirely of living flames. The floor is a river of fire, the ceiling a storm of lightning and fiery cherubim. And in the center of this impossible structure, he beholds the object of his journey, the throne of the great glory. He struggles to describe it. It looks like frost. Its wheels shine like the sun. Streams of blazing fire issue from beneath it, so bright he cannot look directly at it. And seated upon this throne is a presence whose raiment is brighter than the sun and whiter than any snow. The glory is so immense that no angel, no celestial being can endure to look upon his face. This vision is the ultimate credential. The judgments Enoch delivered to the watchers were not his own opinions or interpretations. They were direct edicts issued from this very throne, the seat of all power, the source of all reality. The terror and awe of this experience serve a narrative purpose: to establish beyond any doubt that the story we are being told, the verdicts we have heard, and the prophecies that are to come originate from the absolute, unchallengeable sovereign of the universe. Enoch's journey to the throne was not just to validate his past mission, it was to receive his next one. Having recorded the judgment on the watchers, he is now shown the final, terrifying conclusion of the cosmic war they started. He is given a vision of the end of days, the ultimate apocalypse, when all accounts will be settled and all corruption will be purged from creation forever. His prophecy, recorded thousands of years before the Book of Revelation was ever written, contains hauntingly similar imagery. He declares that the Holy Great One will one day descend upon the earth, and all shall be smitten with fear, he writes, and the watchers shall quake. This is not a quiet return, it is a world-shattering event. The highest mountains will crumble, the hills will be laid low, and the very fabric of the earth will be torn apart. This future event is presented as the final closing of the case file that began with the Watchers' descent. The judgment they received, being bound in the valleys of the earth for 70 generations, was a temporary sentence. The true, final punishment awaits them in this future apocalypse. Enoch sees the fiery abyss, the place of eternal torment, prepared not only for the fallen angels, but for all the ungodly who followed their ways. Crucially, Enoch's vision introduces a figure central to this final judgment, the Son of Man, also called the Elect One. This righteous being, chosen by the Lord of Spirits before the creation of the world, will sit upon a throne of glory and execute perfect justice. The kings and the mighty of the earth, who built their power on the forbidden knowledge of the Watchers, will be toppled. The sinners will be judged, and the righteous will be vindicated. This prophecy does two critical things. First, it connects the ancient crime of the Watchers directly to the final destiny of the world, showing it as one continuous narrative of rebellion and redemption. Second, it proves that the concept of a final apocalyptic judgment and a divine Messiah figure was not a new idea introduced in the New Testament. It was an ancient truth, revealed to a prophet who walked with God long before the flood. The Book of Enoch is not just a history, It is a prophecy of the ultimate apocalypse. This brings us to the most pressing question in this entire investigation, a question that echoes in the comments of every truth seeker who encounters this story. If the Book of Enoch is so ancient, so influential, and contains such critical intelligence on the nature of our spiritual war, why isn't it in my Bible? Why was this file sealed? To answer this, we must move from the celestial courts to the human ones. The process of compiling the books of the Bible, known as canonization, was a long and complex one, carried out by councils of religious leaders centuries after the time of Christ. These were men of faith, but they were also men facing practical challenges. They sought to create a collection of texts that was cohesive, theologically consistent, and clear for a growing, often uneducated global church. And therein lies the problem. The testimony of Enoch is not simple. It is not clean. It complicates the narrative of sin in a way that can be deeply unsettling. The official redacted story is straightforward. Man sinned, man is responsible, and man needs a savior. It is a powerful and true narrative. But Enoch's testimony adds a disruptive layer. It presents humanity not just as perpetrators, but also as victims. Victims of a celestial conspiracy. Victims of a technological and biological contamination from a higher order of beings. It suggests that the evil within us is not entirely of our own making, but is also the legacy of an ancient alien invasion. This is a wild, untamable truth. It raises difficult questions about free will and divine sovereignty. It introduces a cast of characters, watcher angels, Nephilim, disembodied spirits, that vastly complicates the simple story of the fall. For the gatekeepers of the canon, a text this volatile, this explosive, may have been seen as a liability. It was easier to seal the file, to archive the testimony of this star witness, and to present the world with a simpler, more manageable case file. The decision may not have been born of malice, but of a desire for control and clarity. But in redacting the record, they left humanity fighting a war without its most crucial intelligence briefing. The decision to exclude the Book of Enoch from the canon was not just a theological footnote. It was a strategic choice with profound consequences. To understand the motive, we must understand the nature of institutional power. Institutions, whether religious or secular, thrive on order, clarity, and doctrines that can be easily taught and controlled. The testimony of Enoch is the antithesis of all three. Consider the truth it presents. It's a raw, unfiltered account of a cosmos teeming with rebellion, interdimensional conflict, and hybrid monstrosities. It doesn't offer neat theological boxes or simple moral lessons. It presents a gritty, terrifying reality where the lines between heaven and earth have been violently breached and humanity is caught in the crossfire. This is not a comforting bedtime story. It is a battle report from the front lines of a spiritual war. For the early church councils tasked with unifying a diverse and often persecuted faith. A narrative this wild posed a significant risk. How do you explain to a new convert in Rome or Corinth that their struggles with temptation are linked to the vengeful ghosts of half-angel giants? It's a far more complex message than Adam ate an apple. The story of Enoch resists simplification. It cannot be tamed and turned into an easy-to-digest sermon. And so, they, the gatekeepers, the ancient editors, the theologians who prized order above all else, made a choice. They chose the simpler story. They opted for a narrative that placed the burden of sin squarely and solely on human shoulders, a framework that was easier to manage, to preach, and to build a religion around. They effectively censored the cosmic context of our fall. By leaving Enoch's testimony in the apocryphal shadows, they weren't necessarily trying to deceive. They were trying to protect a simplified version of the truth they felt the world was ready for. But in doing so, they left future generations of spiritual archaeologists like us to rediscover the full, untamed, and terrifyingly magnificent scope of the real story. Do not make the mistake of thinking this is just a story about the past. The Book of Enoch is not a closed case file collecting dust in an archive. It is an active intelligence briefing, and the war it describes has never ended. The first apocalypse was not a final event. It was the establishment of a permanent enemy stronghold on this planet. Its echoes are not faint whispers, they are the deafening roar of our modern world. Consider the gifts of the Watchers. They have become the very pillars of our global civilization. The forbidden knowledge of weaponry taught by Azazel has evolved from bronze swords to hypersonic missiles. The vanity he instilled has morphed into a multi-billion-dollar beauty and fashion industry, powered by social media's relentless demand for a perfect, often false, appearance. The occult knowledge of enchantments and astrology has found new life in the New Age movement and the modern obsession with manifesting reality outside of divine will. The spirit of the Nephilim, that insatiable consuming hunger, is the driving force behind our consumerist culture, a system that devours planetary resources at an unsustainable rate. The lawlessness and corruption that drowned the ancient world are now streamed to us 24/7 through our news feeds. The tactics of the enemy have not changed, they have only been refined and scaled up. The disembodied evil spirits, the ghosts of the giants, continue their ancient mandate: to afflict, to oppress, to drive humanity to despair and self-destruction. The chaos, the division, the mental anguish, the spiritual confusion that define our era are not random. They are the strategic operations of an invisible enemy, the lingering legacy of that first apocalypse. You are not just living in the aftermath of this war, you are living in the middle of it. The battlefield is all around you. Now, we return to the crime scene where this investigation began. The quiet, desperate chamber of the human heart. We return to the question that haunts you in the dark. Why can't I stop sinning? Having unsealed the testimony of Enoch, we can finally give the true answer. The reason your struggle feels like an unfair fight is because it is. You have been told you are wrestling only with your own flesh, your own internal desires. That is a half-truth, and a half-truth is the most effective kind of lie. The reality, as Enoch's dossier reveals, is that you are contending with forces far older, far more cunning, and far more malevolent than your own broken nature. You are fighting against the legacy of the Watchers. Every time you are tempted by vanity, violence, or the allure of power that circumvents God, you are hearing an echo of Azazel's ancient curriculum. You are fighting against the nature of the Nephilim. Every time you feel an insatiable hunger for more possessions, more validation, more stimulation, you are wrestling with the same consuming spirit that once devoured the world. And most directly, you are fighting against their ghosts. The whispers of despair, the sudden onslaughts of irrational anger, the waves of lust that seem to come from nowhere. These are not always your own thoughts. They are the tactical assaults of disembodied evil spirits, The demons, whose origin we now understand, their entire purpose is to amplify your every weakness and to convince you that their voice is your own. This knowledge is not an excuse. It does not absolve you of responsibility. It is something far more valuable. It is intelligence. It is the battlefield map you were never given. Knowing the real reason for your struggle means you can finally fight the real enemy. Your weakness is not the core of the problem. It is merely the battlefield where an ancient war is still being waged. And knowing you are on a battlefield changes everything. This declassified file does not offer easy answers. It doesn't promise a life free from struggle. Instead, it offers something far more potent: the truth. A truth that reframes your personal battle as a single front in a cosmic war of immense significance. The testimony of the Book of Enoch does not ask you to abandon your faith. It invites you to deepen it, to arm it with a more complete understanding of reality. The record has now been unsealed, the censored evidence has been presented, and it leaves you with a profound and personal choice. Life offers you two versions of this story. One is the official, sanitized version, edited for simplicity, safety, and control. It's a story that is true, but dangerously incomplete. The other version is the director's cut. It is wilder, darker, and infinitely more complex. It's filled with fallen angels, monstrous giants, and a war that began before time. It demands more from you. It demands that you see the world not as a playground, but as a battlefield. It demands that you recognize the true nature of the enemy. Which version will you choose to believe? Which reality will you choose to live in? The purpose of this investigation was not to give you all the answers. It was to give you the right questions and to show you where the missing evidence is buried. The power is now in your hands. You are no longer just a believer. You are a fellow archaeologist of the spirit, equipped to continue this excavation on your own. Join us in this investigation. Tell us in the comments below, which piece of evidence from the Enoch file was the missing page that illuminated the most for you?